I don't know what, there's a kind of arrogance that can slip in because, I've been doing this a long time, all of that. It's kind of natural. And the first Yamataka that I went to with Garamche out in um, Arizona, it's a 9-day retreat, and you're inside. You don't see the sun. They have all the windows closed. You sleep and meditate in your same place. You get up for the bathroom, of course, and meals you could watch, but even there, it's you don't see the sun. So it's very intense because it's going 24/7. You're doing chanting all the time. They divide you into three different groups, and at night, two groups are sleeping while one group is keeping the chanting going, the mantra, for like 3.5 hours, and then they ring a bell. Everybody gets up, does the whole practice together, and then the other two sit down to sleep. So it's like that over and over and over again. So there I was, all proud of myself because I've done meditation retreats, and I'm more comfortable than I had been when I started 15 years before. Well, I brought the wrong set of cushions with me to Arizona. And so I was just slightly wrong angle. And I was in agony. And like the first day, I was just like, I can't get through this. It's 9 days, I just can't do this. And I just struggled for the entire time. And I felt like a total basket case. So any kind of like false confidence that I had built up, I've had some experience with Buddhism and meditation. It was all just destroyed mentally. And forgive me, but I have to tell one story because it's this big shrine room, and I was sitting on this wall, and then the same. Um, well, let's see. There was a shrine. Rinpoche was next to the shrine, and then there were like 4 seats facing this way, and then a room full of right-angled rows of people. And so I was like, 4 seats down from him, and relatively inexperienced, of course. And I was just having hallucinations of like physical agony. I was having these thoughts of like someone pouring milk on my head as if that was going to be soothing. I was just, whatever my mind could do, trying to find some kind of soothing thing. And so I'm there just struggling like this and just really having a really, really hard time that would never go away. And Rinpoche passed down. He had a pitcher of milk for his tea. He passed it down to me. And so, it showed me that he knew what I was going through. And, you can wonder how that's done. I don't know. I don't even get into that. But it broke the despair. That was the thing. This was the great compassion of a great teacher, because it was just exactly what I needed. Whereas if someone had said something to me, "Oh, you'll be all right tomorrow," that wouldn't have worked. But to have that kind of recognition, it like made it all right. So anyway, we're fortunate in that way. Yeah, yeah, that's pretty amazing. I know. And of course, those kinds of things are not what it's about, really. The point of all of this is to realize, make real our true nature, and then for that to inform basically everything that we do. It's the path of great loving kindness and compassion, and the only blockage we have to that is really just ignorance, that we don't know. We don't know, and we've very much habituated living in a state of distraction, so we don't have to look. It's really a funny thing because this fear that there's like nothing there, or that if we're not constantly building up our sense of separateness and alienation, that somehow I won't exist, and terrifying thought. And yet Buddhism's experience is just the opposite, is that if you look into that deeply, you really find all the richness and freedom that you could want. So we're kind of funny as human beings. But anyway, okay, welcome everyone. Let's start. We are going through the Dalai Lama's introduction to the first complete translation of what's called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And this translation, which is really an extensive thing, we're not going to go through the whole book, we're just going through His Holiness's introduction. The book was translated, this again, the first translated parts of it in, I think, the 1920s by was kind of an interesting guy. Some Waddell was his name. He was a Brit, and he was into the traditional, like pagan and fairy stories of Ireland, and he somehow came across Buddhism and had some of the first translations. But the first complete translation of the book is this one, done by Gyurme Dorje, who's actually, Western name is Matthew Kapstein. He was a professor at Columbia, and quite a smart guy. I happened to meet him once unexpectedly. I was going to one of the first kind of retreats like this that I did in California, Napa Valley, California, and I found myself in the back of a pickup truck with him because they were driving us out to this retreat where Lama Tarchin was at a place called Ati Ling. In Tibetan, Ati Ling means highest place, Ati, highest Ling, and it was a retreat land, basically raw land with two yurts on it, but owned by Chagdud Tulku, a wonderful Tibetan Nyingma Lama. So we've been going through no, he was just going to participate in it with Lama Tarchin. Yeah, that was pretty wonderful. Yeah, yeah, nice man. I think he's retired now. I'm not sure if he's even in the States still, but nonetheless. So we've been going through the introductory commentary of the Dalai Lama on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and basically he starts with basic Buddhist understanding, these ancient teachings that are shared by the whole Buddhist world of, no self, impermanence, and dissatisfaction, or things being slightly off center, those three things. And then he gets into when they talk about the Buddhahood, the quality of our true nature, the quality of a Buddha. It's said that the Buddha has like three aspects, you might say. The Dharmakaya, the body of truth, the Sambhogakaya, the body of bliss or blissful expression, and then the Nirmanakaya, which is the manifest body, sometimes called the deceptive body, because in ancient India, there were people who looked at the Buddha and all they saw was an old man sitting under a tree, didn't see the qualities. So the Dharmakaya, the Dalai Lama has said, is like space, sky. It's vast. There's nothing you can say about it. The space fills the entire universe, and yet it also fills the smallest particle. And yet it's vast like the sky, but it's not just empty and nothingness. It's like blue. It has quality. So that's the Dharmakaya, and hence in these tankas, and when you see often representations of a particular Buddha, when they're that blue color, that's what it's pointing out, this vastness of the Dharmakaya, but with quality. And then the Sambhogakaya, the subtle forms, the Dalai Lama says it's like the big cumulus clouds that gather in the sky. They're beautiful. There's form there, but we can't grab onto them. So it's a subtle form. And yet because it's form, it's like somehow easier for us to react to it or to use it, or it helps our practice. But it's like on a genetic kind of level. It's still subtle. It's very profound. But still, these beautiful forms that actually enhance, they give you a better sense of the vastness of the Dharmakaya, too. So that's the Sambhogakaya. And then the Nirmanakaya, the Dalai Lama says, is like the rain coming from those clouds. This actually touches us and has all sorts of benefits, obviously, of making things grow, sustaining us with water and everything else. So these are what are called the three aspects of Buddha. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead, in fact, all the Tantra says that these three things correspond in our ordinary experience to Dharmakaya is death. The Sambhogakaya is like the dreamlike state after death. And the Nirmanakaya is our our waking state right now. And actually, we don't see those three experiences as Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. We don't see them as our true nature because our true nature is obscured by our obscurations, both emotional obscurations and mental obscurations. The mental obscurations are the habits of mind that we've developed from acting out of our afflictive emotions. And the afflictive emotions are what come from our sense of alienation. So the remarkable thing here is the complete togetherness, so to speak. We are those three aspects of Buddha. That is us, but we don't know it. So these practices are ways to experience that. So he's going through this, all of this, and where did we stop exactly? XXIV? XXV. Okay, all right, there we go. Yes, I know, I went backwards. Well, like they say in Japan, if you don't understand a book, read it 100 times. You start to have some understanding. Chemistry books too, yeah, it works. All right, so we'll just start right there. Now, when the subtle mind is completely pure, the body or energy aspect of the combination of subtle mind and subtle body arises as the 5 different colored luminosities: white, blue, red, yellow, and green, and in the form of Buddha bodies. All the different mandalas of the 100 deities or the 1,000 deities or whatever number are all expressions of the 5 enlightened families, which are related to the purity of the 5 psychophysical aggregates, the 5 elements, and the 5 pristine cognitions. So this is really daunting because there's so much terminology, and of course it helps to learn, but it's kind of a challenge. But he's talking about the rainbow body, basically. So in the Dzogchen teachings, with this, again, it's said to be 84,000 different collections of practices. Really amazing. And they have all these wonderful explanations. And you have this graded path that's going first from the state of do no harm. That's our self-liberation. Just stop harming people. Stop harming things. Really stop harming yourself. The next step is to help, and this is called the Mahayana. The Mahayana, the Great Path, is divided between the conventional Mahayana, which is using our ordinary dualistic mind, and it's marked by vast loving kindness and compassion. So we start with this love that we have for ourselves, and then we just start expanding it. You love the people that you like, and then you start practicing on loving the people that you feel completely neutral towards, and then eventually loving the people that you hate, and all those practices that allow us to do that. And it's this gradual path. It's called the path of the 6 perfections, and that's what's related to the bowls on the altar. This is what the Dalai Lama teaches publicly. This is what Khenpo teaches, because again, it's accessible by everyone who has an interest, basically. Nothing very esoteric there, although it takes faith or at least curiosity. So this is the path that leads to the perfection of wisdom. And it's like going up, 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 up to the perfection of wisdom. And we're down here and we're kind of looking up at wisdom, and that's what we're doing. We're going up there. The extraordinary Mahayana is also called the Mantrayana, the Tantrayana, the Vajrayana, all these terms. And there, it's a little bit different, because instead of practicing on the causes of Buddhahood, we practice virtue, believing that that's going to ripen in our mind to an experience of awakening Bodhi, one level or another. But in the Tantrayana, since the Buddha said we all have Buddha nature, we actually, believe that, and therefore it actually makes sense to visualize yourself as a Buddha right now, to practice the pure vision of what we can understand of what a Buddha would. And so it's different because instead of practicing the path of causation, we're practicing the path of results. And this is, takes more faith and is not throughout the entire Buddhist world, but is certainly in Japan, China, Korea, Tibet, all the Himalayan countries, was greatly practiced in India too. But yeah, just a little different. And it's kind of the faith, you might say, is a story of a Chinese master and a monk approached him and said, Master, is the Pure Land, the Pure Lands of the Buddha, in this case he was asking about Amitabha, is the Pure Land of Buddha Amitabha real? And the master looked around and said, is all of this real? And he said, well, yes, it is. And he said, the Pure Land's even more real. So it's based on that kind of, maybe even just a hope, but the fact that you come across these teachings, even with doubt, is extremely, extremely rare. So we can practice the Vajrayana. Now in the Vajrayana, again, this graded path, because this pure vision is, is developed and practiced. Very rare that it just kind of comes full blown, like from the forehead of Jove. So here, two great paths. One is called Mahamudra, and the other Dzogchen. Now, Dalai Lama is talking about both of these in this introduction. Buddhism came to Tibet in two great waves. The first one is like back in the 700s, 800s. I may have my dates a little off, but these are when the first texts and the first teachings came from India to Tibet. And then the second wave, the new wave, came in the 1100s, I believe. So of the four schools of Tibetan Buddhism, the four great traditions, three of them are called new schools and one is the old school. So what's different? Well, the new schools talk about Mahamudra. And Mahamudra is, you might say, this practice by which we start out with this idea of pure vision. And there are four levels of Tantra, it's said, in the new schools. There's Kriya, action Tantra, there's Upa or Charya Tantra, there's Yoga Tantra, and then there's highest Yoga Tantra. So the first three, Kriya Tantra, Kriya Yoga, is it's more outer and ritualistic. You visualize the Buddha in front of you, and you're practicing great outward kind of purity, like wearing, all white clothes, and you're changing your clothes 6 times a day. You're only eating out of copper vessels, and vegetarian, and just all these outer kind of purificatory practices. Then as you go to the next one, the Charya Tantra, things are getting more inner, you might say, less dependent on outer appearances. So in the Charya, or also called Upa Tantra, it's still a lower Tantra, but now the Buddha's above your head. And I don't know about you, but in my own practice, I realized it was harder for me to visualize a Buddha above my head, facing the same direction, than it was out in front. So there's something there like that, but people differ. There isn't any significance to that, and it's just my own experience. So again, becomes relatively more inner, more subtle. And then the Yoga Tantra, this is the first time that you visualize yourself as a Buddha in your body. Your body becomes a Buddha body. Yoga, of course, means union, like the English word yoke. What connected two oxen together was the yoke that connected them. The same root from Sanskrit. So Yoga Tantra, these are the lower tantras. But then the higher tantras, limitless highest Yoga Tantra, Anuttara Tantras, if I can remember it in Sanskrit. But nonetheless, that's divided now between internal division between what's called the male highest Yoga Tantra and female highest Yoga Tantra. Male is emphasizing a little bit more. They're both equally profound, but the male is emphasizing skillful methods. The female is emphasizing more inherent wisdom. And then there's also where the male and female are together. So, but they're all highest yoga tantra. And there, like in our own tradition, you start out when you're practicing like that with what's called nundro, the go before practices. Nundro literally means, and it takes you through the whole range of Buddhist experience. And you're doing purification, you're doing accumulation of merit, you're doing direct guru yoga transmission. But the idea is that you finish nundro, if you do it in this outer kind of structured kind of way. And there are two paths of Mahamudra leading to full realization. One is called the formless Mahamudra, where you are recognizing moment to moment to moment, full awareness on whatever arises in your mind, the appearances, the outer appearances, inner appearances, whatever. We're practicing on the awareness of whatever arises. And that's the simple practice. The great teaching on it is Tilopa's Ganges Mahamudra, it's called. Garamche is taught here on that, extremely profound text. But then there's also what's called the form. So that's the formless Mahamudra. And then there's the form Mahamudra, which is also called the 6 yogas of Naropa. And this is, again, using the subtle body as a help. It's said to be, more effective, not that you can really talk like that, because it depends on a person's inclinations and karma, and they're both equally profound, of course. But there's something about being able to use those special forms, the manipulation of energy and winds, in the subtle body and the subtle channels. But basically the 6 yogas of Naropa correspond to the 6 bardos, the 6 gaps in our existence. And what are those gaps? Well, one is the waking state, right? Then there's the moment of death. Then there's the after death bardo, called the Sidpa bardo. Then there's a dream state. Sometimes we exist in dreams. Sometimes we exist in meditation. And sometimes there's the arising right after death called the clear light. So there's 6 different kind of states we can find ourselves in as human beings. And each one of these corresponds to one of the 6 yogas of Naropa. So they use various meditations in that. So anyway, all of this is Mahamudra. And it all involves this clear light awareness on whatever is arising in the mind. And then slightly different is the whole world of Dzogchen, great completion, great perfection. Again, these teachings came from the first wave of Buddhism. And they're different technology, you might say. So it has much similarities, but some slight differences in terminology. The great thing are between Trekcho, this great body of purification, and then Turgal, which is leaping over, they call it. So there are many preliminary practices and all sorts of things. We're so fortunate here because, one, the Drikung Kagyu, which without any intention, all of us, I would guess, have found ourselves involved with, it actually has both. The Drikung is called the river with 2 cherries, one cherry being Mahamudra, one cherry being Dzogchen. Because back in its long history in Tibet, there was a Dzogchen master who, through the rules of the day, became one of the head of the Drikung Kagyu lineage. So the Drikung Kagyu, although it's Kagyu New School, technically it has 2 nundros, Mahamudra and Dzogchen. Dzogchen is called Yangzab, nonetheless. In Dzogchen, there's slightly different technology, but the end result's the same. But the difference is said to be there's an inner radiance that each one of us has. And in the new schools, they believe that the inner radiance is kind of covered over right now by all our stuff. And so we do this practice. The effect of the practice is to melt those obscurations, those barriers, and then we experience our inner radiance. In Dzogchen, they say we're actually experiencing our inner radiance right now. And so you're working with the inner radiance from the get-go. Someone described to me once the difference is that in Mahamudra, again, we're using with our clear vision, undistracted awareness of whatever's arising. Whereas in Dzogchen, it said you're practicing awareness of awareness itself. So it's a step subtler. But in the end, good grief, these are very high states. And we also have a teaching that I'm not really familiar with, but in our particular tradition, which comes from Jigten Sumgen, the Drikung is a separate sect, is Jigten Sumgen. And he made the statement of these teachings that we have are called gonchik, it means one taste. And he says that all of Buddha's teachings is completely permeated with wisdom. And so there's really no difference between conventional teachings and absolute teachings. These are all just, mental divisions that we make to help. But actually the whole thing is just extremely profound, so you don't have to get into worrying about that. But nonetheless, that's what Dalai Lama is describing here, because he's talking about both Dzogchen and Mahamudra. Okay. These relationships form the core of the practices presented in Highest Yoga Tantra, as does the experiential cultivation of the nature of these deities through the daily practice. So that's key. The experiential cultivation of the nature of these deities throughout daily practice. Someone asked Lama Tarchin once, what's the translation of the word deity? Because that is kind of confusing in English, And he said it means great exaltation. So you're practicing with that kind of great joy from the get-go. So in summary, the following in our practice, the process of the natural dissolution of our gross forms of consciousness and the natural arising from this state of the luminosities and bodies of the deities. First, the actualization of inner radiance is refined, and this serves as the substantive cause for the arising of the Buddha body of perfect resource, that's the Sambhogakaya, and the Buddha body of emanation, respectively, that's the Nirmanakaya. Thus, the three bodies of a Buddha are perfected, which is the fruition of the path of Tantra. So again, all of this is very dense stuff. Now, as for the forms of the meditational deity, which are generated in the practice of Tantra, there are two principal types: peaceful deities, peaceful Buddhas, and wrathful deities, wrathful Buddhas. In general terms, these are concerned with the transformation of the cognitive and emotional states associated with attachment and aversion, respectively. So, what blinds us? We have this fundamental ignorance, not stupidity, just this fundamental ignorance. We're ignoring, we're not seeing our true nature. We're looking out instead of looking in, you might say. So we're seeing everything out there. It's like the biblical verse, you see the speck in the eyes of others, but you don't see the log or the beam or the bigger stick in your own eye. And so out of that ignorance, the first division is between attraction and aversion. So we have this out of ignorance, this wrong idea of ourselves as completely alienated entity, existing unto itself, not related to anything else really. And then we have this kind of fear. And what do we want? Well, we want to get more and more and more of the stuff that feeds that. That's attachment or love or greed or lust, all those things. And then we have the fear that maybe we're going to lose that alienated sense. So that's anger and aggression and all of that. So these are presented in the Tantra as the peaceful Buddhas and the wrathful Buddhas. And thereby you have these subtle, like I said, like genetic engineering, these extremely powerful natural ways of using the energy of those two things, but in an enlightened way, in actually a valid way, instead of this energy that we put into making things complicated. Okay. In general terms, these are concerned with the transformation of the cognitive and emotional states associated with attachment and aversion, respectively. The peaceful deities are quiescent and are expressions of the natural purity of attraction, that is, the mind resting in its natural, pristine state. The wrathful deities are the dynamic aspect of the peaceful deities and are expressions of the natural transformation of aversion. That is, they represent the mind's active transformation of delusion into pristine cognition. And that's the power of them. And what's tremendous about this is that we don't need to try to make this happen. These Buddhas have arisen from the realization of great masters and the Buddha himself. And they are our own nature, but in this form. It's not just some sort of random made up thing like some charismatic man or woman thought up, like a great hit song or something 2,000 years ago. And so by just doing the practice, in other words, when he says there's the generation stage in tantric practice, where you're generating yourself as the Buddha, we practice what's called Vajra pride. We think I am. This is valid. It makes sense. This is not something artificial, although it seems that way, to visualize myself as a Buddha. At the same time, we're learning the symbology and the meaning of these different aspects of the mandala and the Buddha's body and accoutrements and all of that. And then there's the clarity. So we're practicing the clarity. We're practicing the body of the Buddha. We're practicing the speech of the Buddha, which is the mantra. And at the end, we're dissolving it and just resting in the mind of the Buddha. So one of the reasons that the Tantra is said to be more powerful, especially in times of degeneration, is that it's using body, speech, and mind together. Because normally in the conventional methods, we're doing our meditation, and then there's post-meditation experience. So we're virtually quiet our body, we're not doing any speech, and we're just focusing on the mind. And then in between, we're walking around and losing our awareness and practicing mindfulness, trying to practice in that state. But it's this two-fisted kind of thing. There's meditation, there's post-meditation. But with a tantric meditation, it's all there together. And so we had someone here, a wonderful woman who came to White Lotus for, even before we were White Lotus, she had been coming on Sunday mornings for like 6 months. And she came up to me one morning and she said, "When are we going to do any meditation?" And I said, "Well, we've been doing it for 6 months." But it wasn't the idea that she had. And I knew where she was coming from, because that's how it affected me when I first, again, without conscious choice, stumbled onto it. So there's real sense there. But anyway, we practice the generation. And then there's completion stage practices, which involve the veins and channels and everything. But then there's dissolution, where we dissolve everything. So we're practicing Mahamudra, Dzogchen. The image that they use is that the generation stage is sort of like you have a bow and an arrow, and you're pulling back on the bow. And when you let go, that's the completion stage. So these practices, generation and completion. Here we go. As we now see, the path of highest Yoga Tantra involves taking dissonant cognitive states, such as attachment and aversion, onto the path. In the path, followed by pious attendants, the Shravakas, dissonant cognitive states are categorically perceived as something to be renounced. In the Mahayana path, however, there are two approaches which contrast with that of the pious attendants. According to the Mahayana Sutras, if a certain situation suggests a positive outcome in terms of benefiting others, the voluntary use of desire or attachment is allowable. However, in the Tantras, it is not merely that desire or attachment is permissible when beneficial. Here one deliberately utilizes their energies as the path to purifying or consuming the dissonant states themselves. So, what's he saying here? Tantra uses everything. And that's why it's powerful, but that's why it's dangerous too. Because literally, it's in the higher states, it's like riding states of bliss to Buddhahood. But of course, we're beings that attach. And some of the enhanced kind of states that can come, if not protected, can be problematic. In other words, there has to be this understanding of great compassion and the renunciation. Um, it isn't fully, of course, but with that understanding. And so consequently, there are all sorts of protections for the student. What's one protection? Well, it has to be empowerment. You can't do these practices without empowerment. And then there have to be teachings. There have to be esoteric teachings that are not written in the text. You can't just get a book and do it. You have to have instructions, transmission called lung prana energy from the qualified master to the student. And then there are the samayas. These are the bonds of trust between student and teacher, which is between us and our true nature. There's something completely harmonious and unifying and healthy about that. But of course, we express it in this outer way. So there's the bonds of trust between the student and the teacher, but then there are the bonds of trust amongst the practitioners. These are samayas. Now this is, these are important protections, but they're not well understood, unfortunately. The Tibetans understand them very well. But in our culture, we just don't think that way. Lama Tarchin said, for instance, the bond of trust is like a rubber band, the samayas. And the teachers realized. So the student's having trouble pulling away, getting into negative things, whatever it is. It's like the teacher knows that rubber band can stretch. But the teacher's enlightened and will never let the band snap so far. Said the greater danger is amongst the students, because the students are not enlightened, and therefore they can pull and snap that bond. And that's an extremely negative thing for their own, development. There's this understanding too of, like he's saying here, the Shravakas, the pious hearers, are those who come to self-liberation. They don't come to complete enlightenment. They don't have a complete understanding of the outer world of phenomenons, the whole scientific phenomenal world, but they see the emptiness of self. And the example that Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche gave is, it's like you're walking through a forest, and the forests are poisonous trees. These trees are behaviors and the poisonous fruits that are the fruit of these poisonous activities that we do. And in the self-liberation phase, the Shravakas, we learn to just, we just have an axe. It's very heavy. That's the practice of shamatha, concentration, meditation. And it's very sharp. That's the practice of vipassana, insight. And we just chop down that poisonous tree. Falls over, no more bad fruit. But then in the conventional Mahayana, we're walking through the same forest, and we take some of that poisonous fruit and a little bit of it, take a little bit of, like a hair off the tail of the dog that bit you, just a little bit as an antidote. And this is, what are we doing? Well, like he's saying here, we're using attachment in the conventional Mahayana. The fact that we feel love and attachment for others. And even though right now it's very limited, still we can use that quality of love, which in a sense is delusional, but we can use that effectively, and that'll take us all the way to Buddhahood. Now in the tantric practice, we're walking through the same poisonous forest, and now you take some of that poisonous fruit and you take a big bite out of it. This is mind-boggling, because we're working the energy of it. So the energy of even anger. Anger is so powerful. This is why the wrathful deities appear so scary, and why they're standing on a fire, the sun disk. The peaceful deities are on a moon disk. And why? Because if you're in India, think of it hot at night. The moonlight is complete. Like Monday, you can look at the moon. You're not going to burn your retina. It's the basic compassion of the heart, completely safe to practice. Conventional, it's really good, peaceful. But the wrathful aspect is like the sun, said to be centered in the brain, much more active, immediate, the anger is so powerful and instantaneous, so, dangerous, but very powerful if we can tame it. Okay. Given that the practices of the Tantras include the disciplined engagement of subtle physiological processes and the transformation of the energies associated with attraction and aversion, before a practitioner can embark on the practice of Tantra, he or she must find a spiritual teacher who meets the qualifications as set out in the authoritative literature and must receive empowerments and graduated instruction from that master. In addition, the practitioner should complete the preliminary practices, that's the Nundro, and achieve a thorough grounding in the foundational paths of the sutras, which includes the development of the altruistic intention to attain enlightenment, bodhicitta, the development of calm abiding, the stabilization of attention on an internal object of meditation, and the development of penetrative insight, an analytical meditative state that dissects the nature of its object, its relationships, characteristics, and function. The development of calm abiding and penetrative insight. So calm abiding is shamatha. Penetrative insight is vipassana. Again, calm abiding is the concentrative aspect of our mind, focusing on an object, whatever object of meditation we like. And again, the distractions continue to arise, but we just ignore them. And it's this training of the mind again and again and again of mindfulness and awareness of what we're focused on. But then the vipassana is what arises from the calmer mind, that we can suddenly see things as they are. And there are intellectual teachings, so we are sort of guided away, but it takes you to the point where you have no more concepts and a pure experience, you might say. But at any rate, this is all well thought out, practiced, known in the conventional Mahayana, and that's what we're doing here too. All of these are these qualities that are protections against misuse of our own powerful energies. The development of calm abiding and penetrative insight are the means by which the practitioner can cultivate his or her understanding of emptiness, which is an appreciation of the total absence of inherent existence and self-identity with respect to all phenomenon. It is an essential prerequisite for beginning on the path of Tantra that the practitioner achieve a profound appreciation of both non-substantiality and its interdependent relationship with phenomenal reality. The Tantras presuppose this understanding, so it is in the sutras, therefore, that we find the extensive elucidation of the methods for developing a complete understanding of emptiness. Traditionally, in India, 2,000 years ago, one would not be introduced to the Tantra until one had had a substantial realization of emptiness. In India, the Tantra was transmitted from guru to student, like secretly, like in the forest, in the middle of the night, just you and your teacher, or maybe a very small group. It was sort of outside of the monasteries and the structures, but of course it eventually was incorporated. But it was different when it went to Tibet. The Tibetans did some things differently, and one thing they did is that they made the empowerments more like of a public kind of, because they recognized as a blessing in just that, and introducing the mind to these things, as long as the faith is there and the understanding that it's all about compassion. The Dalai Lama says we do not practice the Tantra to get to enlightenment quickly. We practice the Tantra because it's the fastest way to liberate sentient beings. So it's this complete altruistic mind. There's said to be different views, like between the Dalai Lama's school, the Gelugpa, and say the other schools of Tibetan Buddhism. The Gelugpas are very clear on that you have to have a very solid understanding of conventional bodhicitta, the conventional path to Buddhahood, before you begin the Tantra, because the Tantra can have problems and difficulties. But the Nyingma, for instance, would say, well, this is true, but at the same time, life is short. You got to take some chances. So it's like different in outlook. But here's the Dalai Lama teaching both of them at the same time. So it shows you, too, that these are not ultimately sectarian differences. They're just differences in aspect and approach. And, no one knows somebody else's mind. You don't really know. But I really do believe that when you find yourself like at a place like this, there isn't a mistake. Sometimes people think, oh, I need to go do 10 years of study here and then come back and do some more. But there are no mistakes. Okay. Now, as to the nature of the understanding of emptiness presupposed by the Tantra, the majority of masters of the Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, and Gaelic schools agree that this is the view of the middle way, propounded in the sutras and elucidated by Nagarjuna in his works. In the Dzogchen view, however, there is also a unique method of explaining emptiness, which emphasizes the inseparability of emptiness and inner radiance. But nonetheless, principally, this designation does refer to emptiness as presented in Nagarjuna's middle way. So some subtle, like philosophical differences. As far as the concept of emptiness, or the ultimate nature of reality is concerned, this is one area where there is an emerging convergence between the Buddhist understanding of the ultimate nature of existence and the evolving contemporary scientific view. This convergence relates to the unfindability of entities when these are analytically sought. In modern science, the methods of analysis are principally applied to investigating the nature of material entities. Thus, the ultimate nature of matter is sought through a reductive process, and the macroscopic world is reduced to the microscopic world of particles. Yet when the nature of these particles is further examined, we find that ultimately their very existence as objects is called into question. This interface between non-substantiality and phenomenon is a fundamental focus of Buddhist philosophical analysis and of experiential analysis through meditation on the nature of mind. As is now becoming more commonly known in the contemporary scientific field, a subtle understanding of the nature of the arising and dissolution of both individual thought and the cycles of existence lies at the heart of Buddhist literature and practice. So this is something so mind-boggling, People hear of rebirth, for instance. But Buddhism teaches two kinds of rebirth. There's one that is both are emphasized in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but one is going from lifetime to lifetime. That's the one that people are familiar with, the thought of it anyway. But there's also the instantaneous rebirth. From moment to moment, we're actually dying and being recreated. And because there's sort of a karma, a similarity, it's like a movie. Again, these days, I've lost it because of cyber world. But in the old days, individual movie frames, right, on the film. And that's passing very quickly through the projector. And so you see this image of Marilyn Monroe. The next frame is another image of Marilyn Monroe, just a little bit different. But it's this recreation. And because there's this seemingly continuity, we think there's something there that is continuous. Because the appearance is that way. But yet it's actually momentary arisings again and again and again. And that's our karma. We have something that's arising moment, 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 moment. It's said that the great meditators in India had said, I can't remember, Kemp always comes up with this number. There's something like, in a snap of a finger, there's something like 360 in the traditional text, mind moments. And, we're not able to see them all, but a great meditator can. Um, so, at any rate, this is quite remarkable, this sense that we have of permanence. In summary, therefore, even though the stages of preparation for engaging in the practices of highest Yoga Tantra are extensive, it is said that since the mode of procedure in highest Yoga Tantra follows a very close correspondence to the nature of existence, human beings of this world are regarded as having the perfect, gross, and subtle physiological basis for undertaking these practices successfully. Normally in our lives, if we know that we are going to be confronted by a difficult or unfamiliar situation, we prepare and train ourselves for such a circumstance in advance, so that when this event actually happens, we are fully prepared. As I have outlined, the rehearsal of the processes of death and those of the intermediate state, the bardo, and the emergence into future existence lies in the very heart of the path in highest Yoga Tantra. These practices are part of my daily practice also, and because of this, I somehow feel a sense of excitement when I think about the experience of death. At the same time, though, sometimes I do wonder whether or not I will really be able to fully utilize my own preparatory practices when the actual moment of death comes. A sense of uncertainty and often fear is a natural human feeling when thinking about the nature of death and the relationship between living and dying. It is perhaps not surprising, therefore, that the Bardo Turgyal Chenmo, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a treasure text which focuses on this important subject, has become one of the best-known works of Tibetan literature in the West. Carrying out the first complete translation of this cycle of teachings has been an extraordinary accomplishment undertaken with great care over many years. I hope that the profound insights contained in this work will be a source of inspiration and support to many interested people around the world, as they have been in my own culture. Somewhere, I think it's Chogyam Trungpa said that, this, even in English, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's a little bit misleading because, yes, it's about dying, it's about rebirth, but it's also about living. It's something that's completely relevant to every moment right now for us. So that's the Dalai Lama's introduction. Thank you for putting up with my ponderous explanations and all these terms. These terms can be very, very daunting. All right, any questions? Anything else by anyone? What time do we have now? Yeah, we're still have a few minutes. Yes, Rogo. All right.
I don't really have anything to say.
We got Zoomers.
Yeah. So, as you know, I have an office here that I stay sometimes, and one day I was staying there late. And when I was walking downstairs, I was trying to open the door to get out, and I felt that there is a body there. So I was just pushing, there is a body. I couldn't open the door.
Whoa.
And there is a homeless person. And I woke him up, and he said, "Okay, I'm hungry, give me something to eat." And I know that my mom gave me an apple pie. It was in my car. So I gave him the apple pie. And then the next day, and I couldn't do anything else because he was satisfied with the apple pie. And so I went back, and the next day I was talking to Fred. And I was saying that, okay, I met this person, I gave him an apple pie, but I wanted to do something else because it's raining. It was raining and it was cold. It was in the middle of winter. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I can take him to shelter or something. And he said, don't do anything to those people because they choose, the way they live, and you cannot really do more to them. And Fred, he's a bodhisattva. He will do the right thing. And your phrase that in Mahayana, we can liberate somebody, we can help somebody. after all these years listening to you, I still don't understand this. How
Uh-huh.
can you liberate somebody? How can you help if that people doesn't want to be liberated?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You really can't. No, you really can't.
but you said that our goal is to liberate all
Yes.
sentient beings,
Yes.
but the only way they can liberate themselves is to develop qualities of the mind, grow as a human being,
Yes.
develop interest in Buddhism or in liberation.
Yes.
And the only way we can help them is to develop our qualities of the mind and show a good example. If, for example, I walk on the street and person sees me as a quiet, I don't know, intelligent, kind person, they would ask me, okay, what are you doing to become a person like this?
Yes.
And I would share my story, and maybe they would become interested in Buddhism.
Yes.
And that's what happened to the Buddha. He was walking the street, and people were asking him, who is your teacher? You're so luminous, peaceful.
Yes.
And how can I, in other ways, how can I liberate somebody when I'm not there yet? When I don't have qualities,
Yeah.
how can I liberate?
Yeah. Having that kind of humility is this high example, because the whole world is trying to do stuff, right? And they all have the complete arrogance that I can. One teacher was asked once. They were discussing a terrible divorce that was going on, and the couple was just being really cruel to each other. And this person asked, what would Chenrezig do, and what would Chenrezig say in this situation? And the teacher responded, why does Chenrezig have to say anything? So there's time for being silent, there's a time for acting, and we never really know the effect that we have. And it's just like in our own lives. You look back and there's like some vivid moment when you were 8 years old, seeing a certain flower or something. And you realize that these moments are more important than like graduating from college. In a spiritual sense, something is the vividness when you experience the vividness of the mind. Of course, that's the deities, the vividness of it. But it's this kind of paradox, because we live in a paradoxical, limited situation of our thinking mind, and we have to, we have to have aspiration for Buddhahood, but that too can even there can be an obstacle. It's so profound when you're meditating, that sense of I am meditating is there. It's so strong and it's just very rare moments when we don't have that. So it's a paradox. Yeah, we have to want to liberate sentient beings, but how does that happen? Well, again, it happens through somehow beings, something in there clicking for them, so to speak. The source of this faith is actually based on experience, not just intellectual idea, not blind faith for sure, but it's magical, really unexplained. It's said that the Buddha in a previous lifetime was in a hell. He was living in a hellish being. And there were demons who were being forced to, the hellish beings that were being forced to drag carts without wheels. And the demons were whipping them. Some guy fell down and couldn't do it anymore. And the Buddha, the man who would become the Buddha, the person, jumped in to help that being. It said that was the beginning of bodhicitta in his mind. And then it went on for 3 eons, developing it steadily. But it was from that moment that he started practicing, the path that isn't self-grasping. So I think it's a mystery. I really do. And yet in our own lives, we see that, oh my goodness, something beneficial has happened. I remember Gretchen and I, we got interested in the Dharma, took refuge just before the Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize. And, my father, wonderful man, hardworking, ethical, everything. Was a Marine in World War II, wounded. Just a wonderful man, but not intellectual, intelligent, but not intellectual, And he thought, I dropped out of law school to go to a Buddhist center. He couldn't believe it. We told him, and he just kind of lost it. And then he showed up like 2 months later. We didn't see him for 2 months. And he showed up and he said, "Did you really drop out of law school?" He couldn't believe it. And he was convinced that we had lost our minds. I mean, literally. So we went to, a Zen center and we're there. And eventually he came and actually participated in a workshop that if you wanted to be a member of the place, you had to did a little bit of meditation, one day of talks and things like that. And, he never really understood what we were doing, but he could see that we were not worse. Our personalities had become somewhat better, still arrogant, but not as arrogant. And he was impressed that the place was clean. And he was enough of a businessman that, the lights were on. He knew somebody was doing something because he's a very responsible guy. I found later he had some old photographs in some old box because he was on the occupation of Japan. And there he was sitting on the veranda of a Buddhist temple. So, there are forces that we do not know. Buddha said that of the 10 difficult things to know, karma is one of them. To know karma fully, and most people don't have a clue at it. Although, as your mind calms down, you do start to see resonances and things that make sense. Even difficulties become a blessing because it threw you in the right way. So I think of it as a huge mystery. I really do. But at the same time, you have to want to liberate sentient beings and yet have the humility to know that you can't in the traditional way. It's only by realizing your own mind and then how that affects other people. And I believe, invisibly, truly. Even a very small example, our daughter, Megan, was in grade school, and it was like June at the end of the school year and very hot. They didn't have air conditioning. So they had the windows open in school, and a bee was in there buzzing around, And this is like sixth grade boys, and all the boys were chasing around it, wanting to kill that bee. And my daughter, just because she'd been hanging out with llamas, she caught it in a glass and let it go. We didn't know anything about that until, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years later, 15 years later, we happened to bump into her teacher, like in a shopping mall or something. And she told us that story and how moved she was by that. And so for us, it seems like, no big deal. It says don't kill, cherish life, so we save a bee. Doesn't seem like much, but you don't know how it affects other people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a question too?
Not really, not really. I do find it interesting though, from everything I've learned, and who knows, I'm probably wrong, but karma is a 10, and the realization of emptiness is a 1 on the difficulty scale.
Mm.
So,
I like that.
yeah, that's what I was told.
That's good. That's good. Okay. I think, let's see, we can do a dedication. See if I can find something that might work. If those, therefore, who wish for fortunate destinies in samsara and the definitive goodness of nirvana practice wholesome ways, such as generosity, self-discipline, and meditation, they will certainly reap great benefit thereby. But greater than these is the wisdom of realizing profound emptiness free from all conceptual elaboration, the deep and final remedy for the two obscurations. To gain it, one must strive in proper study and reflection, as is said in the Uttara Tantra, wherefore generosity is productive of enjoyable experience, self-discipline leads to the higher realms, while meditation banishes the afflictive emotions, but wisdom banishes all defiled emotion and conceptuality, and therefore it is supreme. The cause of it is listening to the teachings. May every last one be free. Okay. All right. Thank you for your patience. Yeah. Yeah.